Welcome to the History Nerds United podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today, Jessica Cale from Dirty Sexy History, a podcast that I absolutely love. Jess lives and breathes history. She's one of the first people that I kind of talked to once I started up the podcast. She's the best. You don't want to listen to the podcast? You can go on Netflix and find her there. She lives and breathes history, everybody. I'm going to shut up so we can talk about it. But let's make it 2 for 1. Since you're going to hear about Jess's podcast that I love, how about an ad from a different podcast that I also love? Let's do it.
Hi there, I'm Laurel.
And I'm Katie.
Two sisters who love talking about history, and we are the hosts of Hightailing Through History.
In each episode, we surprise each other with a story about the unknown or unusual bits of history that make the past a goldmine of fun.
A Chinese sex worker turned pirate queen who had the largest fleet in history.
How one of the world's greatest generals was defeated by an army of rabbits. And what real-life person inspired the Mortal Kombat character Scorpion.
History's amazing women, daring escapes, unbelievable rescues, and hey, Canada's maple syrup cartel.
In addition to hightailing through different people, places, and events in history, we are also telling our tales high. Laurel, our resident stoner, but I prefer boozing.
But you don't have to enjoy those things to enjoy our podcast. We've staged you a seat in our smoke circle. Come relax, have a laugh, and enjoy history's weird and wonderful moments as we hightail through history.
That's Hightailing Through History. You can find it on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
All right, here we are. Jessica Cale, podcaster, Dirty Sexy History. It's such a good title. Thank you so much for being here, Jess.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Brendan. It's an honor.
Where did the title come from? Because it's one of those titles, it's so good, I'm pissed off I didn't come up with it myself.
Oh, well, thank you. We do get a lot of love for the title. It just kind of came to me suddenly. I mean, of course, it's a take on, the title Dirty Sexy Money. But I mean, obviously, I think that history is kind of what's more exciting, which I'm not sure what that says about me, but I had to go with it. I was setting up the blog. I think it was 2016, maybe it was 2015. The blog's been going for a long time. And I wanted to think of something for it. I don't know, it jumped to mind and nobody else had the website. So I started on WordPress and just kind of took it from there.
Now, before you even started this, I should point out that you actually have, unlike myself, history credentials. You're originally from Minnesota, but you ended up getting a whole bunch of education in, was it England?
In Wales, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I grew up in Minnesota. You might be able to tell it comes through a little bit in the accent still. But I was super into history, like even as a little kid, I was just obsessed. And I wanted to study castles. And obviously there aren't a lot of castles in Minnesota, unless you count the Corn Palace in South Dakota, which you absolutely should not. So I applied to some schools over in the UK. And Swansea and Wales, they were the first ones to write back and say, yeah, you can come here and do a degree. So I'd only ever been to Britain like once on vacation. I'd never been to Wales. And I moved there alone at 18. And it wasn't like a year thing either. It was actually to go to school there. So I did 2 degrees back to back. And I ended up staying there for almost 10 years. So it was great. It was an incredible experience. And of course, Wales is the best place in the world to be if you like castles, because they actually have more castles per square mile than anywhere else on Earth. When I was there, I was kind of like the castle correspondent for BBC History. It was so cool. When I was doing my master's degree, I was doing all this kind of freelance journalism, and they didn't really have anybody in Wales. So anytime they wanted somebody to write about, one of the kind of tourist attractions, they would send me around to all these different places. I probably saw about half the castles in Wales. It was crazy. It's absolutely unbelievable.
Now, I will say, if we bring up Wales, we have to say, have you watched Welcome to Wrexham yet?
Oh, no, I haven't. But one of my friends is from that area. So I hear about it all the time. Probably half my friends are still in Wales, actually. And they all just love Ryan Reynolds. So he's very popular over there.
The first episode is actually a pretty good historical rundown to understand how it's a country, but then there's the United Kingdom and all of that stuff. So it's not all soccer. There is a little bit of history in there, which comes out pretty well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Wales has some incredible history. It's very interesting. But yeah, whenever you come back and you explain where you went, people always say, oh, you lived in England, right? You're like, oh, I lived in London for like a week. But like mostly I was in Wales that whole time. So you always have to kind of explain, like, it is a separate country. It is part of the United Kingdom. It's only about 3 hours train ride outside of London, but it's beautiful. It's the most beautiful place in the world.
Okay, I have to ask this. What's your favorite castle?
My favorite castle? Oh my goodness, I've got a few. I would probably say Raglan Castle. That is in Wales. It's not too far outside of Cardiff. It's absolutely beautiful. I guess it's a ruin, but there's enough to it that you can still kind of run around and see the rooms. And it has this beautiful moat. And throughout summer, you can see the swallows just kind of flying everywhere. It's very picturesque. It's very romantic. It's like what Americans think of when they think of castles. And it's very close to Tintern Abbey, which is absolutely gorgeous. That's one of those places where you've probably seen pictures of it, but you might not know where it is. It looks a lot like Glastonbury Abbey, but it's kind of like the Welsh version, I guess. But it's absolutely stunning. So if your listeners haven't seen Tintern Abbey, do a little Google search. It's very pretty.
I always research before I talk to somebody. And holy heck, you've done a lot. And like, where do you find the time? I found a baking blog that you had started.
Yeah.
There's recipes on there and everything. And I do not have the energy for it. Where do you get that energy from?
The short answer is I have ADHD. It's sort of untreated, unmedicated. I kind of bounce off the walls. I go down into all of these kind of like obsessions. I don't know. I'm into a lot of different things, and I just kind of go down the rabbit hole and see where it takes me, I guess. I'm not good at sitting still or being bored. I guess I'm never bored. So whenever I have something that I'm interested in, I will just kind of sit down and research it, or I'll get into it, right? So like years ago, I was really into, macaroons, right? Like the French cookies. I love baking, as you mentioned, the baking blog, right? And I read that they were really, really hard to make. And I was like, listen, you son of a bitch, I'm going to learn how to make these, right? So I made them every single Friday after work for like a year until I got really, really, really good at it. I was coming up with like all my like kind of different flavors and everything. And I could do it by memory. Like I didn't have to look up anything about it. You just throw them in the mixer. You do this for a certain amount of time. The conditions in the kitchen have to be right. You have to have the oven open just a little bit. You have to bang the tray so you get the feet, all kinds of stuff, like really, really kind of extreme, right? I was reading all these like French books about like how to make macaroons. And then at the end of the year, when I was like, okay, these are perfect, I got really bored and I just stopped. I haven't made a macaroon in like 6 years. So I think if anybody's listening and has ADHD, they might be able to understand. But I have a lot of hobbies that I don't know, I guess weirdly good at, but things that I haven't touched in a really long time.
I was about to ask, I'm thinking as you're talking, you should have named it Dirty Sexy Baking. And then I'm thinking, no, that's going to come some weird Google results.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it already kind of does. I still get all kinds of messages from people all the time, like thinking it's a porn site. People keep trying to like add me to like X-rated chats and things. And some guy wrote to me from prison and said he needed a date. And I was like, sir, this is a history blog. So this kind of thing comes up all the time. I mean, people will type in dirty, sexy or whatever. And, I get some weird stuff in my DMs for sure.
Well, listen, fans are fans. That's what's important. I want to talk about another job. Heard this on one of the episodes. Ghost tour guide. I need to know all about this. Tell me right now, please.
Well, that was fun. I did that for 4 years. It was the funnest job I've ever had. I absolutely loved it. I was just going to take a little break. And then, of course, I came down with long COVID, but I always meant to go back. I'd love to go back someday. But it was fun. It was really, really fun. So it's not just like the ghost stories. You also tell the history behind the ghost stories. So, you're kind of walking around, downtown. You have these big groups of people and you tell them the ghost story. You tell them the history. You make some jokes. It's fun. And the best part about it for me, because I'm a real costume nerd, right? I got to make all of my own historical dresses. So I was walking around with like a lantern and I had, the historically accurate hair and everything. And I was wearing like a full length Victorian morning gown, like in black velvet with all these ribbons and everything. It was nuts. Like people, the first time that they would see me, like they would take a step back, and I just loved it. It was so much fun. But, of course, being like a history nerd, I could work in all these, kind of little details and things, right? So one thing I've talked about on the podcast, we've written about in the blog is I'm really into like the arsenic green pigment and the kind of history of that. They used to put it in clothes. They used to put it in wallpaper and it was killing people very slowly. So, of course, they don't make it anymore. But I found this green velvet that is that exact shade. So I made arsenic green pockets. I had secret pockets in the dress that were arsenic green. And I was so proud of that. But it was a great dress, I had the sort of underwear and everything with it. You wear it with a corset. Those things are great. You feel bulletproof. And it's a kind of a different way to inhabit the history, and you move in a different way. You think about things in a different way. And I guess it brings it to life a bit more.
How long did it take to get fully dressed?
About 2 hours. But that's including like hair and makeup.
I can get my sweatpants on in less than 3 seconds. I'm just saying. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm just saying. No one can question your dedication. I'll definitely give you that.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much. I mean, I was very, very dedicated to it, for sure. And you kind of structure your week around it. I did it a few nights a week, and it really was the center of my universe. It was a lot of fun, and I do miss it.
Another one of your many, 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 many things that you do. You also write historical novels. Now, I always like to ask this because, right, historical novels, it's a novel. It's not fully nonfiction. So how much do you lean into the real history to use it, or do you go full Mel Gibson where you just do whatever the heck you want and call it history?
That's a really great question. I wouldn't say that I go full Mel Gibson. No, I actually put a lot of historical research into these books. And that probably won't surprise people now that people know me more as a historian than they do as like a historical fiction author. The research is very important. And what I find actually kind of leads the plot more than what I want to happen. So when I start a story, I don't think like, okay, well, I have character A and character B, and this is what I want to happen between them, and this is how it has to happen. I kind of, go down these rabbit holes. I find different things that I'm interested in, and that informs the story more. For example, I'm really, really into the history of cosmetics. And I found all this information about like how people were making kind of 17th century cosmetics. And then that became sort of one of the side jobs of a whole family in one of my novels. So in the Southwark saga, it's set in 17th century Southwark, right? Just south of London. And it's about all these different people that live there. It's not like Bridgerton. They're not dukes. There's kind of like average people. There's a carpenter, there's highwaymen, there's people who work at a bar. It's very, very kind of normal. And one of the families in it, they kind of start to make money in this sort of side hustle through creating these cosmetics in their kitchen. So you learn how people did this and what they used to make it out of, and you think about what that kind of reality would be like, so you're going to walk into this kitchen bar and it's going to absolutely reek of dead roses, right? Because they're making like face cream and things. So it's not like factories. It's more like, what would the reality be like for these people at this time trying to make this with what they had? And for me, at least, I mean, that works better for me as an author because it takes the story in a more interesting direction, if that makes sense.
And now, where do you start? Do you start with a history? Like, will you look at something like cosmetics and say, I want to write about cosmetics, and that's where this story starts? Or do you start with, hey, I want a story about this, and then you kind of pick your historical time period where you want to do it?
Well, it started with my first book, Tyburn. So that started as like an exercise in my master's. I did an MFA in creative and media writing. It was like a double major. So for my final project, like I had to write basically the first half of a book. So the character of Sally came to me, and she was this, I wasn't sure if she was going to be Victorian or if she was going to be earlier, but she ended up being this amazing kind of 17th century alcoholic sex worker, right? And she really came through really strongly. And it all started with Sally. So I was researching all this stuff around that. And at the time, my husband was just finishing his PhD in 17th century history. So of course, we already had all the books and I was really interested in it. And I was able to, kind of research various things. And it kind of came together like that, I guess. And then from there, I kind of went down all these different rabbit holes, the history of Southwark, the history of sex work in Britain, which is something I've always been very, very interested in. When I first started studying history seriously, I've always been interested in the history of like sex, and in particular, like sex work throughout time. So I was very, very interested in that. And then everything else kind of came off of that. And eventually, 20 years later, it kind of came into this podcast that I started doing. So I think that does come through, but I do have all these different kind of side kind of interests and obsessions and things. So we do get distracted sometimes.
Well, let's bring up one more that we should, because, right, we only do audio here. So, but if people want to actually physically see you, all they have to do is go to Netflix, right? Because The Lost Pirate Kingdom, you are a talking head on there. Please tell me, how did you get involved in that? How did that thing come about?
That was so much fun. Oh my God. Of course. So like being a ghost tour guide was my favorite job ever. But I'm not including the TV show. That was one crazy day of my life, and it was amazing. So if anybody's listening, if you want to put me on TV again, I mean, let me know. I'm totally down. So I had written this article about the pirate Anne Bonny a few years before they were making that show. And one of the producers read it and he loved it. And he was actually a really big fan of Dirty Sexy History, the blog. And I thought that was amazing. I mean, one, that he'd found it, but the blog actually was and continues to be more popular than the podcast, especially to kind of a global audience. I guess it's more accessible. But he really loved this article. And one of their kind of crew reached out to me, and they actually emailed me through Facebook. They sent me like a Facebook message. And when I saw it, I thought it was a prank. I was like, what is this? So, they explained they're very nice. They're like, okay, hi, we're making the show for Netflix. And, we were wondering if maybe you'd like to be involved. Maybe we can get together and like do an interview, So we did like a TV kind of interview, and they asked me all these questions. And I went off on this tangent about the history of syphilis, because like any of my friends or anybody who's been like unlucky enough to sit next to me at a party knows that I'm like obsessed with the history of venereal disease. I know that's really weird, but it's where I am. It's where I live. So I went off on this tangent about the history of syphilis because, of course, when they found the Queen Anne's Revenge just off the coast of North Carolina here, they found all of these supplies that they thought the Blackbeard had basically for the treatment of syphilis. So they asked if I thought that, do you think that he could have had it? How did they treat it at the time? What are the symptoms of it? And I just went for it. Just went down this, kind of rabbit hole telling them everything I knew about syphilis. And they were just like, yeah, that was great. Can you fly to New York next week? Excuse me. So they flew me to New York, and we filmed in one day. It was so cool. It was an amazing process. Everybody involved was so lovely, absolutely wonderful people. And then I visited a couple historic graveyards and came home. So it was a pretty cool trip, actually. And yeah, I mean, like the whole production was nuts. So like it didn't actually come out for about 2 years almost after I filmed it, because that was like right before the pandemic. And I think that might have slowed things down a little bit. But one day it was just up on Netflix, and my face was on TV, and I got really scared. So it was cool. I mean, it was very, very cool. Yeah.
So I want to have a really quick soundbite that we can cut this and use it somewhere else. So syphilis got you a job at Netflix. That's my understanding.
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Well, now let's finally get down to it. The reason why we're here, the Dirty Sexy History podcast. How did that start? Was it just another outlet for you as far as, I really need to talk about these venereal diseases with people, and perhaps it's time to do it via audio? Is that how it started, or how'd you get there?
That's a great question. Well, when the podcast started, we'd already been running the blog for about 5 years. When it started, it was like I was writing a couple of articles every single week, and each article would take me about 12 hours. So it went pretty hard until we got to, almost like 100 articles or something. And we had this really good archive going on the site. And then, I started doing the ghost tours, and I got better. At least I felt like I got better at public speaking. And I was getting a little bit more confident in my own voice. When I used to be a journalist, I used to interview people, and I had a hard time like listening to myself talk. I thought it was really weird. But then, of course, it had been like 15 years or something, and I kind of got over it. So the reason we started the podcast was actually because I wanted to make the blog more accessible to people. I had a few friends who had like kind of visual issues, impairments. And I know that they were able to listen to the blog if they wanted to. But it occurred to me that might not be like the most accessible way for people to get the information. And I know that people get information in different ways. I was listening to all kinds of podcasts and things too. And I like to listen to them, like when I'm cleaning the house or, when I'm driving or whatever. And not everybody has the time to just kind of like sit down and find a blog and read it. So I thought, maybe people would like this better, or different people would like it. So we started doing the podcast, and the first several episodes were based on articles that I had already written. It was just like the same article in a different format. It's just me talking about it, And I was not expecting it to take off. I really kind of thought it would be like a niche thing, but it really took off. And I'm so grateful and like so like humbled by it, really. It's been incredible, really like personally rewarding, and just to know that it resonates with people, I think is really cool.
Now, how do you pick your subjects for each episode? I should say that not everything is always totally about sex.
No.
There are different topics, but how do you pick your topics?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's all just different things that I'm interested in. You know, the good thing about calling something like dirty, sexy history, it's so vague. You know, it can be like anything kind of related to sex or anything that you could kind of like even jokingly say is like sexy or dirt, right? And when I say dirt, I'm talking about poisons, venereal disease, sanitation, all different kinds of weird things. So like anything can kind of fall, you know, into those categories, or a lot of things can. And certainly, I mean, basically anything that I would be interested in. Again, I'm not sure what that says about me, but it would be just kind of like whatever I'm into that day, you know? So we've done, of course, like we've done contraception, and we've done how sex work built London's churches. And we've done all of these, you know, kind of like lesser known love stories. We do a lot of gay history. We do a lot of trans history. And even though it seems like it, I don't actually pick this stuff from the news. It's just like kind of like sadly relevant again. So of course we do sometimes talk about that. But apart from that, I mean, it's also other things I'm interested in. I did one, it was a whole episode about like horror tourism in like 19th century Paris, because they were goth as fuck. I hope it's okay to say. But, you know, of course, I used to be like a ghost tour guide, and finding out kind of like the history of other people being like really into that at other time periods. I thought that was just so cool. I really resonated with it, you know, and learning about how this guy, Robinson, was putting on these incredible, you know, kind of like ghost shows, like in a crypt in the 19th century. I was just like, hell yeah. You know, it really, I thought it was so cool. So I really got into that, you know, different things that I find like when I'm researching my books, or different things that I find just in the ether, I guess, you know. So, you know, I'll find a subject that I think is maybe good for the show, and I'll look into it. And depending on how much I can find or what I want to say about it, that's kind of how we do it. There isn't really any kind of great rhyme or reason to it. And this season, of course, like since I got sick, we've been focused more on interviews with people. And these are just cool history books that have come out recently that I enjoyed.
Sounds like a killer hook.
Yeah. But I mean, it kind of works, you know? But also like they are also kind of topics that work really well on the show. You know, like there are a lot of sex and history, or those kinds of adjacent sort of topics. If anybody's listening, if they want to get a book on the show, it's really easy to find me, and I'll probably say yes. So definitely get in touch. Otherwise, I mean, I watch books coming out. I'm in touch with a lot of PR people when they have new books coming out. They just ask me if I'm interested in, which is, I mean, of course, obviously cool. It's like a dream come true. Although honestly, I wish somebody would send me a new bookcase, because I'm kind of out of space.
Now, is there anything you won't tackle? Have you anything off the table that you just don't want to get into it? Either you're not interested in it, or you just don't want to deal with it, or is everything on the table for the podcast?
Oh, no. I mean, we'll talk about anything. Yeah, for sure.
So jumping, because you've studied a lot. You've read a lot. Can you give me, I don't know, we'll say top 5, but we'll see how many we get. Your top 5 dirty, sexy history facts from any time period on whatever topic you want. I want to just see what comes out of that head of yours.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess since I'm thinking about it, probably my favorite dirty, sexy history fact is that most of the, you know, kind of like late medieval churches in London, at least a lot of the ones that survive, anything from kind of like around the 12th century, all these beautiful churches, they were funded by sex work, right? We've done articles about this. We've done a podcast about it. But the way that they kind of collected all of the money in order to go about all these very expensive construction projects, it was just straight up from prostitution. And I just think that that's amazing. That's a good fact. Okay, what else? Contraception has existed for thousands and thousands of years. It actually predates recorded history by a good bit. To hear some people say it, possibly by as much as 6,000 years. The earliest depiction of a condom that we know of actually comes from, I think it was 12,000 BC. It's in a cave painting, a condom in a cave painting. Isn't that incredible? Just the whole history of contraception. I mean, that's really my favorite topic. That's where I live. I just think that's so fascinating. A lot of people think that contraception was invented in like 1960, which is just so ridiculous. So it's just become like my mission in life to talk about the history of contraception, which leads me to fact number 3, right? Not only has contraception always existed, but recipes for it used to be printed in common cookbooks. So like in the 17th century, like the equivalent of like Martha Stewart, right? Her name is Hannah Woolley. In these best-selling cookbooks, She was printing recipes for, like homemade wine, how to roast a chicken, how to make hand cream, and how to make homemade contraception. And that to me is so awesome. That was one of those finds. I don't know if anybody else has ever written about that, because I actually found that myself like a few years ago, and I've been writing about it and just trying to spread the word. Like, guys, this book is online. You can find it. It is here. It is on this page. I just really want people to understand that it existed. Really into the history of arsenic as a pigment. I think more people know a little bit more about that now. We've done a post on it in an episode. But throughout the 19th century, and actually starting in the kind of late 18th, the sort of trendiest color was this beautiful shade of green called Scheele's green or Paris green. And they used to make it with arsenic. And people would wallpaper their houses and this stuff. They would dye fabric for dresses, and they would even put it in their food, right? It was just the trendiest color. Everybody had to have it. And it is beautiful. And in some historic houses, you'll even still see studies that are like that exact color. But if you ever do see that, maybe don't stay in that room too long. Because with these houses, they'd get very damp. And the way that the mold metabolizes the arsenic, it basically lets out these little kind of puffs of like toxic smoke that people were breathing in without realizing it. It's impossible to tell how many people it killed. But, a lot of people had respiratory issues. They had things like pleurisy that would kind of miraculously clear up, like if they left their house for a little while. But nobody ever thought it was the wallpaper.
It's amazing anybody lived past 20 back in the day.
It is. Yeah. I just find that so fascinating. I'm really, really interested in that. So that's number 4. And number 5.
I can come up with one for number 5. I'll set it up for you, because this is one of my favorite episodes of yours. If somebody said the first boob pic could only come after the camera was invented, what would you say to that person?
Not true. Yeah, not true. Fun fact. The first kind of boob pic that we know of was made by this incredible female painter back in, oh my goodness, I think it was the early 19th century. And she was sort of involved with this very famous sort of statesman, Daniel Webster. People have heard of him as in like the devil and Daniel Webster. And they had this kind of like on again, off again, maybe long distance fuck buddies kind of thing going on. And after his wife passed away, she painted him this beautiful, incredibly detailed miniature of her boobs. And she like took it to him and gifted it to him, right? And it's this portable little picture. And like he used to like keep it in his pocket. Just like, in case you need to like pull it out and like look at some like fantastic tits. So actually, yeah, boob pictures are a lot older than the camera.
You're welcome, America. Speaking of America, I was preparing for this, and there's just a philosophical question that, especially for somebody who has lived on the other side of the Atlantic, I feel like depending on where you go, America is the big evil. We're corrupt. We're terrible. At the same time, I also feel like we're kind of prudes when it comes to sex. I was wondering if you can workshop this with me, because it feels like if you go to other places, it seems like we're a bit uptight as a people. Mm-hmm. Which side is right, or are they both right? Are we prudes or are we not prudes?
Yeah, I do think that I think Americans are kind of prudish, honestly. But it's difficult to see if you grow up here and you're socialized in that way. But there are a lot of hangups that are different, So for me, I didn't notice it until I moved to Europe. So I was there for almost 10 years and things are, pretty different, honestly. And you don't really notice how different things are until you come back. So I moved there. I came back when I was almost 30. And immediately I noticed a lot of things that I didn't see when I was a kid, So here, people are pretty funny about what you wear. People think that you're not, because like people walk around in yoga pants or whatever. But like until you've been a bartender on Wine Street in Swansea, like you haven't seen public nudity, let me tell you. I won't go into detail, but my God. And like I'm not being like prudish about that myself. It's just different, Like our idea of like what is appropriate or not appropriate is really different. And then of course it's different within the country as well. If I would wear like a low cut top or whatever, kind of at any point in my life over here, I'd be like, oh my goodness, is this inappropriate? Should I put on a sweater? But like in Britain, nobody gives a shit, you know, like not a single one. And it's like just not a big deal. But like here, people can be like quite judgy about it.
Well, especially with Dirty Sexy History, the episodes a lot of times remind me of things that I come across. And this is just to get into it, right, is we think about a lot of things with sex and, you know, keep behind closed doors and all that stuff. But then you read history and everybody slept naked back in the day. Everybody was naked all the time.
Sure.
And then people don't put this together. A lot of married couples lived in one-room houses and had 8 kids. Right? Like nowadays, we would say we need to put those kids somewhere else because you put 2 and 2 together. And it's like people used to be very open about a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
Because they had to be.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not necessarily a great thing either, of course. I mean, like there are good things and bad things about it. I think now there's just a lot of emphasis on like the idea that within relationships, you have to be like everything to each other, right? You have to be each other's like partner and best friend and therapist and sometimes business partner and all of these other things. And to put all of that on one person is really unhealthy. And you don't have outlets with other people. Like you can't have friends. You know, some people don't even go to therapy because they're like, why would I need to talk to anybody else? I don't know if cleanliness is the right word. I'm sure there's a better word for it. I just don't think it's healthy.
Well, no, therapy, everybody should go to therapy. Just everybody go to therapy. Just go. Just trust me. Even if you go for a couple times, you're like, I don't need this. All right, then you went, you said, okay, you don't need this. And I always like to remind people too, therapy is like dating.
Mm-hmm.
Your first therapist, you both may be wonderful people. The therapist may be wonderful at their job, but it's a vibe. Therapy is a vibe, and you got to find somebody who vibes with you and just gets you, who laughs at your jokes. That's very important for me. Lindsay's been laughing at my jokes now for 2 years. And,
that's great.
And I'm going to keep going back to her, even though she tells me that making her laugh is not part of the process. I disagree with her on that. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's wonderful.
Jess, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
And that's it for this episode. Jess, thank you so much. Go out and listen, everybody. Dirty Sexy History. It's awesome. You're going to love it. Until next time, hit us up. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Leave us comments. Leave us likes. Like the podcast, 5 stars, please. Leave comments. Send us emails. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.